there was a time that Taiwan actually had air superiority. That day is long gone, and China could pummel the island with missiles. It has more land-based ballistic missiles than any other country in the world. Many of those are aimed at Taiwan. All countries, I think, are now waking up to the fact that a use of force by China against Taiwan would have ripple effects for the rest of the world, and that they can do some things to protect security as well.
Hi, welcome to Stand Easy. Today I'm speaking with Ms. Bonnie Glaser at the German Marshall Fund in Washington, D.C. Ms. Glaser is a foremost expert on China, Chinese power, Taiwan, the Indo-Pacific, and most particularly, how it relates to the United States of America. Bonnie has worked in the field for over 25 years, advising the Department of Defense, Department of State, and working with a number of key players on the region. Real pleasure to speak with her today. Here she is. Ms. Glaser, really nice to speak with you this morning. No doubt with everything that's going on right now, you're exceptionally busy. First of all, can you explain to me your background for everyone else that may not know you, and also what you do exactly at the German Marshall Fund?
I'm the director of the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund, where we focus on transatlantic coordination and cooperation on policy toward China, and also Indo-Pacific alliances and partners, and connecting them with transatlantic relations.
That's why it's such a great treat to speak with you today. What we're getting a lot through all the noise is all these purported experts that tend to pop out at times like this. But you've been working on the region for over 20 years now, and an exceptional background. You said prior to the interview that you're absolutely swamped. Is this something out of the ordinary right now? Is this a title change? Is this simply narratives being hit in the media, or is this something different that you've encountered?
Well, I think that China has been in the news and has been a topic of interest among governments as well as the public, and of course media, for a long time. What's particularly new right now is the focus on Taiwan, which is due to, I think, Chinese military pressure around Taiwan. And so I did live in Taiwan for a while, studying Chinese years ago, but one of the areas that I do focus on is the cross-strait relationship between China and Taiwan and its implications. And so that in particular has me very busy in the last few weeks.
Definitely. And with the Taiwan cross-strait relations and the recent incursions, it's a balance between, it seems, U.S. interests, Taiwan maintaining its democracy, but also China asserting its longstanding policies of interest with reuniting its quote unquote renegade province. Can you explain the complexity of that right now from both the Chinese side, the Taiwanese side, and U.S. interests in the region?
Well, from Taiwan's perspective, Taiwan has long considered itself to be an independent sovereign state. It does not want to be part of China, and public opinion polls in Taiwan certainly bear that out. The vast majority of the people want the status quo. A growing number of people would like to be independent. They have watched China's campaign and crackdown against Hong Kong, and that has confirmed their view that they don't want to be part of an autocratic system under China. And there have been periods in Taiwan's history where they had better ties with mainland China, when they had presidents from the KMT, but right now they have a president from what's really referred to as a pro-independence party, the Democratic People's Party, the DPP. A Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, and therefore the government in Beijing has taken some very harsh tactics and approaches toward Taiwan. In China's view, Taiwan, as you said, is a province, is part of China. It is the last piece that has not been reunified with China. It is a symbol to the Chinese of the period of national humiliation that started in the middle of the 19th century with the Opium Wars, and supposedly ended when Mao Zedong stood up and the People's Republic was established in 1949. But of course, China remained very weak after that, and Taiwan still stands today, even though China has become much stronger, is still that symbol of a part of China that doesn't want to return to the embrace of the motherland. And China, I think, really does not want to use force to unify Taiwan. They have a growing toolkit of things they can use for economic pressure and diplomatic pressure, and particularly military pressure. And that's primarily what we've been seeing. The United States, I think, does not want to get involved in a war in the Taiwan Strait. U.S. policy has long been that the two sides of the strait should work out their differences peacefully. And the Biden administration has repeated that no side should change the status quo through use of force. But it looks like China probably has or is close to having the military capability to take over Taiwan. In the past, it hasn't had that capability. And so that has, I think, alarmed many people, that because China perhaps now can use force, that it will. My own view is that China does want to unify without bloodshed. It really wants to win over the people of Taiwan. It's willing to coerce them, but I think that use of force will be a last resort. I don't rule it out, but I don't think that it will happen in the near term. And
you've been very balanced in that assessment, going back through your body of work. You've stated that you don't think that the use of force is going to be their primary method, but you did mention the other tools that China has to reunify Taiwan. What are those tools, both within Taiwan, and what are the Chinese using within other states within the U.S. to shift the opinion on either defending Taiwan or changing opinions that Taiwan won't have the allies that it assumes it has to maintain its democracy?
Well, China has had this very long-term strategy of using psychological warfare against Taiwan, using disinformation, trying to undermine the government and the governance of Taiwan. We see this during COVID-19, and we have seen this during elections in Taiwan. But this has really been going on quite a long time. They use a lot of cyber operations against Taiwan. So a lot of it is in the information space. But outside of Taiwan, China does try to block the island from participating in any international or regional organizations. It threatens other states who are strengthening their relationships with Taiwan. So most recently, we've seen a very tiny country of, I think, about 3 million people in Lithuania, who agreed to allow Taiwan to establish a representative office in their country. And the real problem that angered China was that Lithuania allowed Taiwan to call the office the Taiwan Representative Office. So most of Taiwan's offices around the world, its diplomatic offices, use the word Taipei, which is the capital of Taiwan, and not Taiwan. And so China withdrew its ambassador and is putting all sorts of economic pressure on Lithuania. It doesn't want other countries to follow in Lithuania's footsteps. So it's really, it uses very harsh measures against countries that violate what China calls its one China principle. So these tactics sometimes work, sometimes they don't, but often China will provide positive inducements to countries to switch diplomatic allegiance from Taiwan. to China. And of course, many years ago, when the People's Republic was first established, most countries in the world still had diplomatic ties with Taiwan, or the Republic of China, as it was called, and really is still the name of what they call their country today. And so since then, we have seen most of the countries in the world change their diplomatic ties to the PRC, the People's Republic of China. And Taiwan has a mere 15 diplomatic partners left. They do use some economic measures against Taiwan to put pressure on Taiwan, but very minimal, mostly because they would shoot themselves in the foot. The relationship between in the economic realm between China and Taiwan is massive, and both sides would suffer if China were to really try to squeeze Taiwan economically. But we could get to a point where China decides that it needs to use force, because there is no peaceful way to reunify the island with the mainland. We just hope that that doesn't happen.
Could you explain the nuance of U.S. foreign policy in recognition of Taiwan? And also, I saw a message you put out the other day with regards to congressional authority for use of force. And these things are important when looking at crises. Could you explain that?
The United States had a defense treaty, a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan from 1954 to 1979. And then as part of the agreement with Beijing on normalization, the United States broke that treaty. And in its place, the U.S. Congress created the Taiwan Relations Act to guide the U.S. relationship with Taiwan. There is no language in that document that requires the United States to come to Taiwan's defense. That is left up to the president and Congress to decide based on circumstances that prevail at the time. But the Taiwan Relations Act, the TRA, does require the United States to sell defensive weapons to Taiwan and to maintain a strong, robust military presence in the Western Pacific to prevent China from coercing Taiwan. And that is essentially the legal document. The United States believes that the sovereignty of Taiwan's territory is unsettled. It was left over from the war after World War II, and Japan had occupied Taiwan. And then the area of Taiwan was essentially said to be no longer under the administration of Japan, but it didn't say who Taiwan was going to be returned to. Would it be given to China? Would it be separate? It was really left unclear in the San Francisco Peace Treaty, and therefore the United States says that we don't recognize Taiwan as an independent sovereign state, but we also don't accept Taiwan's claim to sovereignty or China's claim to sovereignty. So officials usually use a very unclear, vague diplomatic language when they're asked a question like that. They try to dodge it because it is an awkward position, I think, for the United States. Nonetheless, the United States has enormous interests in Taiwan, and Taiwan is a vibrant democracy. It was authoritarian until 1987. And then afterwards, continuing to, it took a while to unravel. It was the lifting of martial law and then elections. And Taiwan today is a very successful democratic, you can call it an entity if you don't want to call it a country. I tend to call it a country. But it deserves a great deal of credit for what it has accomplished in delivering governance to its people. Indeed, probably done better in combating COVID-19 than almost every other country in the world. And in addition, Taiwan has expertise to share with the world, but it was kicked out of the United Nations in 1971, and it's very difficult for Taiwan now to participate in UN agencies like the World Health Organization. And so a core part of US policy is to help Taiwan and to try to convince the international community that Taiwan is important, and that if China used force against Taiwan, that might embolden China to use force against other countries. So we as a country, I think, have a great deal of attachment to Taiwan and believe that Taiwan's security is important, and that its differences with Beijing, as I said, must be settled peacefully. I would lastly say the US does not oppose reunification. And if the people of Taiwan were to decide to be part of China, that's not something that the United States would oppose.
And coming to that point on what the people of Taiwan want, there's often been criticism of Taiwan's military capability in defending itself. And looking at recent statements, it looks like the Taiwanese are taking this much more seriously. New policy decisions with their reserves. How does Taiwan's military system square up?
Well, Taiwan, of course, is the weaker party in this. In the military balance between China and Taiwan. It's probably been more than a decade since Taiwan was even superior in terms of being able to protect its airspace, but there was a time that Taiwan actually had air superiority. That day is long gone, and China could pummel the island with missiles. It has more land-based ballistic missiles than any other country in the world. Many of those are aimed at Taiwan, and indeed the People's Liberation Army has taken the takeover of Taiwan as its main mission, and so it's made a lot of progress. Taiwan has not really kept up. And I think that increasingly is seen as a problem. Their defense spending hovers around 2% of GDP, though all of Taiwan's leaders have said that they set a goal of spending 3% of GDP, but they have not gotten there. The current president, Tsai Ing-wen, has certainly increased defense spending and is taking defense more seriously. But sometimes Taiwan procures weapon systems that don't seem to be well suited to the mission of preventing a PLA invasion. And that's really what Taiwan's focus should be. They should be putting things like smart sea mines in waters around Taiwan, which are not expensive, so that they can blow up invading PLA ships. They've recently purchased these coastal defense cruise missiles, which I believe is a good capability for them to have, because they're mobile, and they can fire at incoming PLA craft, whether they be warships or smaller assets. So these are the kind of capabilities, we call them asymmetric, not really trying to produce everything that the PRC has, but the things that are necessary to defend Taiwan. And sometimes they are buying and producing themselves asymmetric capabilities, and other times they are buying things like the M1A2 Abrams tank from the United States, which is the heaviest, most expensive tank in the world. There is no bridge in Taiwan that this tank could drive over without it collapsing. But the Army wanted this tank, and they believe that they have some operational concept that they can use it for. But most people say this was not a good way to spend their really limited defense resources. So basically, the U.S. likes to describe what Taiwan should do in this way. They should buy large numbers of small things and small numbers of large things. There are lots of ways that Taiwan can make itself difficult to digest. Some people have said it can be more of a porcupine. And it doesn't have to be all that expensive. The other issue is that they don't have a really functioning reserve system. They decided to end conscription I think it was about 7 years ago, and have stumbled, I think, in creating an effective all-volunteer force. And so the reserves train something, like 4 days out of the year. People who are in the military serve now for 4 months. I think probably don't even learn how to shoot. So that is a serious problem. And finally, I would say that what they really also need is a territorial defense force. They need to involve civilians. They need to get average people trained on first aid, maybe trained in how to shoot some guns and rifles and Stinger-fired missiles, and know where they're stored, so where they can get them in a crisis. And there are so many good models for Taiwan. I've looked at the Baltics, for example, bordering on Russia. They experienced the Soviet Union, and they understand the importance of having all of their people together to defend their country. Sweden and Finland are also very good examples. So Taiwan does not have a very strong sense that all of their people need to be part of the mission of defending the country.
That really encapsulates where Taiwan is at. And due to the complexity of Taiwan being a democracy in the history in the region, it seems as though the recent tensions and then the creation of the Quad and AUKUS have amplified the intensity and the interest in maintaining stability in the region. Can you explain where the Quad, AUKUS, and Taiwan vis-a-vis the PRC fit in?
Well, I think first I should say that the Biden administration, I think, has worked hard to try and bring countries into the problem of Taiwan's security, because this shouldn't just be an issue between the United States and China. Other countries should be vested in this as well. So we have seen, for example, many statements that have included language on the importance of preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Agreements between Japan's former Prime Minister Suga and President Biden, President of Korea Moon and President Biden, and then during Biden's trip to Europe earlier this year, in the G7 statement, in the U.S. EU statement, and the NATO statement. So all countries, I think, are now waking up to the fact that a use of force by China against Taiwan would have ripple effects for the rest of the world, and that they can do some things to protect security as well. The willingness of countries to do things varies, and that's understandable. And so we have seen, for example, the Quad, which is very important, I think, in terms of demonstrating a willingness of 4 leading democracies to work together. They don't say it's against China, but it is to protect their interests, their democracies, and make themselves more resilient. But Japan, Australia, and the United States are willing to separately and together talk about the importance of Taiwan's security, but India lags far behind. And so the recent leader statement from the Quad did not mention Taiwan. It did mention, I believe, North Korea, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea. And so Taiwan is notable by its absence. For India, I think it just didn't want to confront China directly on this issue that is so sensitive to China. But the Quad itself is an important example of new security architecture in the Indo-Pacific region to bring together, as I said, countries that have shared interests. The Quad has a military security defense component, but that is not the dominant feature of the Quad, and that is partly because of India. This may change over time if China increases the threat to India. India's willingness to be more openly confrontational may change. But the Quad itself is focused on things like supply chains, for example, in delivering vaccines, which they plan to produce and then deliver to Southeast Asian countries. The AUKUS is another example of new security architecture in the region. And because Australia wants to now manufacture nuclear-powered submarines, it tells us that Australia sees that its security is not just limited to the geographical area immediately around its homeland, but it extends far further. And conventional submarines were not going to allow them to operate in areas far afield. And Australia wants to contribute, I think, to the peace and security of the region more, and sees this as an opportunity to step up and also an opportunity to anchor the United States more firmly within the region. Australia, Japan, other countries, I think, in the region want to be confident that the United States will remain committed, present, and actively involved in the region. No country in the Indo-Pacific wants to live under Chinese hegemony. Some countries don't particularly want to take sides. Many of the small countries in Southeast Asia are quite concerned. But they do want to balance against China. So they want external powers to be present economically, diplomatically, and militarily, so that they can balance against Chinese power and aren't forced to accommodate to Chinese preferences and interests.
Okay. Ms. Glaser, I know you're exceptionally busy. I'd love to speak with you all day. One final one, beyond everything that you write and produce at the German Marshall Fund, what would you recommend as one or two of the top books that up-and-comers should be looking at right now?
So a really terrific book on grand strategy in Asia by Mike Green called By More Than Providence, which really goes back to the origins of U.S. involvement in the region all the way back to the 18th century, and talks about why the region is really very important to the United States. So that's a terrific book. There's a relatively new book by Rush Doshi called The Long Game, which is about Chinese grand strategy. It's for national rejuvenation and how its ambitions are of course, regional, in that they want to be the biggest power and the dominant power in the region, but also that they have global ambitions. So they are playing the long game. They have a very ambitious strategy. So those are two books that I think are really worth reading.
Okay. Ms. Glaser, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time this morning. Good luck.
You're welcome.